Oh dear, what are the woke left going to do now?
Badenoch, 53,806 votes, and Robert Jenrick, 41,388.
The Conservatives, who are seen as a right-wing party, have elected their fourth female leader, and she's black, Kemi Badenoch. Now, I don't care that Kemi Badenoch is black. I agree her colour is completely irrelevant, but it is simply a statement of fact. And it's also a fact that whilst those who spout diversity and inclusion are absolutely seen as on the left, i.e. the Labour Party, the left have never either had a female leader, although under his definition a man would probably count, and as for a black female, the main ones on their benches are at the back, and one of them was suspended for racism. The irony. Even their front bench are lacking in any real diversity. And again, I would rather people ignored colour, but if you're going to bang on about it, you better make sure that you're diverse. Kemi is a brilliant politician. She's forthright and direct. She calls it as she sees it, and well done to those who voted her in, the majority white, ignoring her colour and looking at what she could bring to the table. And in their eyes, her qualities were ones which they believe will unite the party and guide them to a victory in the next general election. Rishi Sunak, again, another historical first, who stepped down today after brilliantly skewering Rachel Reeves's budget, said that he was proud to be the first Asian PM, but said that it wasn't a big deal.
So I'm proud to have been the first British Asian Prime Minister, but I was even prouder that it was not that big a deal.
Yeah. I agree. It's not. Again, it's just a statement of fact. The response to Kemi has been incredibly positive. Boris Johnson tweeted, "Congratulations to Kemi on her outstanding victory. She brings a much-needed zip and zap to the Conservative Party. This sleaze-ridden Labour government have no ideas or agenda beyond the old tax and spend socialism. They are far more vulnerable than the parliamentary maths might suggest. Kemi has exactly the right courage and clarity to expose Keir Starmer's failings." Now, Kemi's appointment should, first of all, break the narrative that black people are a homogenous, oppressed group who all think the same thing and are victims, a narrative which has been peddled by many in the established media for years, a narrative that I am sick of and only results in my success being seen as only because I'm black. What Kemi's victory does is show that there is nothing that cannot be achieved, irrespective of what colour you are, and there are no excuses. Yes, racism exists, but here in the UK, it is down to you as an individual to agree to be shackled by it. Well done to Kemi. I can't wait to hear her get up against Keir Starmer in PMQs. I can't wait to hear her hold this disastrous Labour government to account. All right, let's get started. I'm joined in the studio by the Director of Popular Conservatism, Mark Littlewood. Mark, what did you make of Kemi's victory?
Well, I actually voted for Robert, but it was a difficult choice. I thought that the MPs whittled it down to two superb candidates. Keir Starmer's not going to know what's hit him over the dispatch box next week. We saw a brilliant Rishi Sunak in his budget response, a sort of demob happy Rishi Sunak.
He was fantastic.
It's amazing, isn't it? When you unburden politicians of office, suddenly they perform twice as well. She's going to be really punchy at the dispatch box. She's got an immediate task to bring the party together, but I don't think that will be particularly difficult, actually. There were differences of emphasis between herself and Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick was much more specific on policy. She had more of the vision thing, which she's going to have to slowly fill out with policy. But she's got to bring the party together. That's the first key step. Shouldn't be awkward. She's got to sock it to the Labour Party. Then she's got to develop quite a programme for government, because despite the thrashing on July the 4th, the shellacking that the Conservative Party received, there is every chance that they could be back in government in one go, and that means a thoroughly worked-out policy programme. Not today, not tomorrow, not even this year, but over the next 18 months. And then the big elephant in the room is what you do about reform and Farage. Can you win back a good chunk of the vote who disappeared in that direction? So quite an agenda for her to get her teeth into. But if she can pull that off, she's not just the new leader of the Conservative Party, she's probably the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Well, the polls are suggesting that the Conservative Party are ahead as well, ahead of Labour already. And this was even before we knew who was leading the party. So that suggests that either or, people would still
Yeah, I mean, it's
them.
interesting, the poll, I mean, it shows how far we in the Conservative Party have fallen, where we're punching the air that we're 1% ahead and on 29% of the vote. But Labour's honeymoon period was just hours or days. And usually when a government gets into trouble, I'm not saying there's no coming back, but it tends to be you just keep sliding. So the Conservatives can be pretty optimistic going forward. And as I say, after the thrashing in the July election, you would have thought it would have been months of Labour Party politicians walking around on cloud nine, whilst Conservatives were in clouds of despair. But I think Kemi's victory, the nature of the campaign, means that Tories can see a way back to power in one attempt. Not easy, cannot be taken for granted, high mountain to climb. But if we actually start to unravel the leftism that has racked Britain for the last quarter of a century, frankly, some of it under the last Conservative administration, then I think this can be won back. So big challenge, but huge opportunity for Kemi.
But if the Labour Party carry on with this attack on farmers, attack on pensioners, attack on working person, however they want to define it, I mean, that was a nonsensical farce. If they carry on, I think the Conservatives could literally... Do you think they could play the same tactic that Keir Starmer did, just sit back and let them just slide themselves out of power?
Well, you know, they could, but I rather hope they don't, Nana, because... Keir Starmer just stood to one side, issued various statements of word salad, hoped that the incumbent government would become so unpopular that he'd sort of just come into power on a negative vote. Then turns out you haven't really worked out what to do. The Labour Party's prescription just seems to be that the Tories didn't tax enough, spend enough, borrow enough or regulate enough. Now, I'd actually say I think the Conservatives did rather too much of all of those things, but they're doubling down on what I think the Conservatives got wrong in the last administration. I really think that the Conservatives have got to think through, under Kemi's new leadership, a real positive agenda for what would change. So, sure, in the coming weeks and the coming months, it's mainly holding the government to account. Kemi actually just said that in her speech. You've got to be the case for the opposition against the government. But as time rolls on, I'd like to see a pretty clear policy agenda. And I think there's an awful lot in Britain that needs to be completely reset. We're governed by quangos and bureaucracy. We're taxed to death. And I actually think a pretty radical agenda is probably the one to win, rather than a play it safe and hope Labour implodes.
Well, if they stick to being Conservative, then they've got every chance of winning. What are your views on the farmers and the attack on inheritance tax?
Yeah, it's extraordinary, really. I mean, what seems to be particularly pernicious about it is Labour are giving the impression that they have identified each and every cohort of voters who don't vote Labour, be this pensioners or people who send their kids to private school or farmers, and the tax burdens being shuffled onto them. And what's particularly worrying about this is a good number of farms are on the verge of viability, right? And if you impose this inheritance tax and you have to basically sell off 20% of what you inherit because you haven't got the liquid assets to pay the bill, you become even less viable. So it's not just a higher tax that all people complain about, is potentially an existential tax for British farming. And I'm afraid I'm expecting to see more and more of the sort of policy we saw in Rachel Reid's budget as we go on. They are going to try and hoover up yet more cash from the private sector to pay out for the relatively unproductive public sector, where their political allies are, where their client vote is. And in consequence, the overall economic pie, the size of the economy, will be a lot smaller than it should otherwise be.
And I notice a lot of the constituencies where these farms are on are Tory constituencies, aren't they? Yeah. What a surprise. Mark Littlewood, thank you very much. Really good to talk to you. Really good to talk to you. Well, joining me now is the former Labour spokesperson, James Matthewson. James, welcome to the programme. Thank you very much for joining me. So your thoughts, first of all, on Kemi Badenoch leading the Conservative Party. Is this a good thing, in your view?
It depends who you ask if it's good for, Nana, because there's different people, obviously, in our country will have a different response to this. I think Keir Starmer's comment and congratulations to Kemi is important. I know you might not agree with this, but I do think these milestones are important of, showing us exactly where we are as a country and who can achieve what. Kemi's story is a very impressive one. She's a very impressive person, and she's clearly a very intelligent individual. And to see that she's been given the opportunity to lead the party that represents her politics is important. However, and you always know there's going to be a however when it comes to me, because I don't agree with much about what Kemi Badenoch says about anything, really. I do think it shows that the Conservative Party has kind of drunk its own Kool-Aid. It believes its narrative internally, and it believes the narrative that the culture wars are the thing to get them out of the situation they've been in. I just don't agree with that at all, and I think it's actually quite a concern. And I think there will be people today who are concerned. There'll be people who are celebrating Kemi's win, absolutely, in the Conservative Party, but there will be people in this country who are concerned about her victory, given the things she's said about different groups and quite a wide range of groups of people in this country.
Well, yeah, I would actually admit that sometimes Kemi does say things that you sort of think, why are you saying that? But then they're all guilty of that, and you can't be perfect all the time. But what about the fact that she's the first black female? Does that have any impact on you? The Labour Party haven't even had a female leader, let alone one of colour.
Yeah, it's important. It is an important thing, absolutely. And not just that, but I think the more important thing than just Kemi's identity as a black woman is her story as an immigrant, a first-generation immigrant. You know, her parents came to the UK, had her in a hospital in London, and then went back to Nigeria. So she was raised in Nigeria and then came back here when she was 16. So that's a pretty impressive turnaround for somebody who's a first generation immigrant. And so the story is impressive and it's important, as I say. However, to me, what's more important about politicians is what comes out of their mouth, what they believe.
That is true, but the Labour Party stand on a plinth of diversity and inclusion and all that kind of thing. And, you know, the Labour Party claim to be the party of the working people and all of that. But yet, throughout its entire history, there hasn't been a woman or anyone of any other ethnicity.
There hasn't, and there should have been. Should have been. There's been so many women in the Labour Party who've been incredibly capable of taking up that mantle. You think about people like Harriet Harman, you know, who an entire generation have passed by in the Labour Party. So it's right. You're absolutely right on that point. Somebody like Angela Rayner being in the position she's in now is vitally important as well. Because of Angela's background, Angela's story, the difficulties and the challenges she's faced, not just as a woman, but a working class woman. So it will be interesting to see these characters at the dispatch box now as we talk about that story. But as I say, the things Kemi's said, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I'm highly concerned about them.
What about the things Angela Rayner said, like Banana Republic, Etonian, Tory scum? I mean, I don't think Kemi said anything that bad. So what about Angela Rayner?
Things I've said and things I've agreed with. So I can't comment.
So you would agree that the Etonian, Republic, whatever it was, homophobic, scum. I mean, there's the words that came out of her mouth.
The homophobic
Banana
Etonians.
Republic and all that sort of thing. I mean,
yeah, the homophobic Etonians who were making homophobic comments at the time, I believe, are scum for saying that. Yeah, absolutely.
No, but Angela Rayner made those comments about people, about the Tory party, and you were saying that about Kemi Badenoch and things that come out of her mouth. So I'm just alluding to the fact that that came out of Angela Rayner's mouth. And whether you agree or disagree with what she's saying, that's a bit much, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's two things with Kemi Badenoch. There's the thing that people say she says stuff before she thinks about it, or that she's very forthright, and that's sometimes a quality people like, as you've alluded to. You know, that's a quality that you admire, and many other people do as well, myself included. I quite like somebody who is forthright and strong on things and says things as they are, as I do with Angela Rayner. You know, Angela's a similar sort of character in that regard. However, it's about the politics of it and the policies, and things like the comments she's made about autistic people. She said that autism's a mental health issue. It's not. She's saying things.
Well, some people might argue it is. I mean, look, some people might argue it is.
No.
Yeah, but some people might argue that she's not an expert in autism, so I would forgive her that. I would forgive her that. She's not an expert in autism. You know.
I'm an autistic man with an autism diagnosis, so I mean, taken from me, it's not a mental health issue.
Yeah, well, fair enough. I mean, to some people it might be. I don't know.
It's to some people.
Yeah,
you don't. It's
listen,
science, man.
but that's not the biggest.
You don't get to redefine science.
Well, listen, that's not. But that's not the biggest. You know, that's not the biggest terrible thing that she said. So that's what you're pointing out. Yeah, but if you're pointing that out against Banana Republic, Etonian scum and things like that, I don't think they're comparable.
Right.
Listen, I just want to quickly get to the farmers with you, because we'll, you know, that's fine. We can disagree on this. What about the farmers, though? Just very briefly, Labour's policy, to the inheritance tax policy that could end up with people having to chop up their family farms and to just pay for the tax.
Yeah, I mean, 70% of farmers won't be affected by this. So it is those farmers that will be affected, or those ones that come within that bracket. There's no easy choices here.
Yeah, but does it not risk our food security, though, in your view? I mean, even if it's 70%, as you say, 30% is quite a wide amount, and that can continue to rise. That's not a, you know.
Those 30%, the risk assessments the government have done clearly point out that they're not going to be, you know, stopping production 30% of the food population. They wouldn't have done that if that was the case. So
I think they would have.
I believe it's a storm in a teacup. I believe people are annoyed about paying inheritance tax. Mark Littlewood there was quite fascinating, saying that, Labour are targeting people who don't vote Labour. That's a very interesting assessment, seeing as what I think they're targeting are people who can afford to pay more tax. And if the people who can afford to pay more tax aren't voting Labour, then that tells you everything you need to know.
OK, well, I think it tells you everything you need to know when they don't understand the difference between being asset rich and cash poor. James Mathewson, thank you very much.